Some days, Louis, I cannot get enough of talking with you and finding out about these stories. I'm that much of a fan. And yes, I do repeat myself at times. I want to talk a little bit about the comrades that Thaddeus has met and how he feels about them and how they feel about him. Can you share a little bit about them without giving the stories away, though? These are worth reading.
Sure. I think from the beginning, as we talked about before, that it was important for Thaddeus to be with others who could support him and also who he could support. And it occurred to me then that it might be useful to consider people who come from very, very different backgrounds, because they would each have something to offer that he was not familiar with or had not been part of his original makeup. So his first boon companion is a fellow who's a little of a fussy character. His name's Anders, and he's very precise, and just have a feeling he could grow up to be a great accountant. He's a plump little guy. He's nearsighted, of course, and so on. But in some things, he's very deep, and he lends structure to Thaddeus, I think. The second fellow we run into is a street thief who had a terrible backstory, but has tried to rise above it all. But he brings a kind of an other world, a sinister worldly flavor to Thaddeus's life, which is unusual for him. And then when they finally make it to the school, they discovered their third companion, guy named Zoar, who's a prince of a southern municipality, and a royal house, and he brings another completely different side of one of resources and what resources can do and political intrigue. So all four of them together, it's like the four suits of a card deck, and they just go together. And what they all admire in Thaddeus, I think, is his being staunch, and particularly his loyalty. And once he gives his trust and love to someone, there's no going back, and he will defend and look after people to the last very breath. And they like that. They respect that.
You can't blame them. So these are four young men in their formative years, as young men really, really reaching desperately to become adults. And so they aren't always prepared for some of the challenges that they end up facing on this journey from where Thaddeus is taken from his home with permission and goes to the Sorcery College. They come across some crazy things. So as young men, is this more of a, we're going to have fun doing this, or do they sometimes bite off more than they can chew?
It's a mixture of both, but there certainly are occasions when they bite off more than they can chew. And fortunately, we have the experienced and wise elder sorcerer along to pull their necks out of the fire from time to time. But as time progresses, what I hoped to achieve is, because of the strength of their relationships with each other and the growing up and the learning that comes on with advancing years and life experiences, they get to the point where they don't need to depend on him as often, and they depend on themselves more. And the secret here, which makes the central aged sorcerer a good model for them, is that he is very content to allow that.
Yeah, there is a lot of permission that's done. Go ahead and grow. You're in a safe environment, and if nothing else, I'll take care of you kind of attitude. We also discovered that the master of the boys, or the leader, seems to have a love interest sometimes, and she seems to be more handling, I guess, the witch's side as opposed to the sorcerer's side. How does that work out?
Well, um, one of the things about being an institution, whether it's a college, a learning environment, or a work environment, or any other, is that people tend to form relationships, and because they are people that you see a lot, and sometimes that works out very well, and sometimes that doesn't work out well at all. But it's true in this day and age that we have the book set in. So yes, Sylvester, a long time ago in Sylvester's history, and he's a much older fellow than you'd think. A long time ago in his history, there was a great disaster which overtook the people, and a lot of folks were killed, unfortunately, lost their lives. The population was uh, debilitated greatly. So he comes up with a doctrine of those of us who survive should really go out and try to repopulate the world. And he runs across this uh, lady, and they hit it off right away. And so they kind of start together. Now, it's never dealt with in much detail in the book, but actually, as, if you really are picky about your reading and look into it, there are hints that suggest that the four young fellows are distant relatives of that pair. And the lady goes on to become the headmistress of the women's version of the College of Sorcerers. I mean, if you're going to have a College of Sorcerers, you should have a College of Sorceresses, but I don't use that term because it's very hard to say as well as spell. But she's the headmistress there, and they have maintained a relationship over a number of years and decades. And they work as one, and in the very finale, the concluding work, that's really what it was sort of pointing toward all the time.
Oh, now I got to keep reading. You're telling me I got to keep reading. Oh my gosh. I love that. So one of the marvelous things about epic fantasy is the time space continuum can be stretched and bent to almost anything you want it to be, and yet keep a very cohesive world building capability with different kinds of creatures and different kinds of attitudes from one group to another. And you have some wild characters. So, how did your imagination come up with some of these really strange characters, like, a ghost army, as an example?
Well, that actually was something that I thought about um, for some time about how to actually do that, or certain characters like that. It seemed like at certain points, particularly in Thaddeus's journey, there might be things he would need to know or learn, not only for the adventure itself, but in general. And at these sort of nodal points, a certain kind of character might help him to do that. Now, being an epic fantasy, hopefully it meets that category, its requirements. It would be interesting if these characters were also some that you're not going to run into every day. So we could kind of contrive to try to make that work out that way. But from each encounter, there's something to learn and something to be gained. But there's also often a great threat, a great risk. So as it is in life itself. So a lot of it has to do with learning. A lot of it has to do with trying to make a plan where this might work well for him. And a lot of it is just plain fun.
Oh, absolutely fun. And one of the other creatures, as it were, that becomes very important and pivotal for Thaddeus and even the rest of the young men is the demons. And the demons aren't just a flash in the pan; they're like always there on a parallel time frame. Is that the whole good versus evil, or is it even deeper than that?
Well, it goes back to how this particular world was formed in the early days. Um, and one of the ways I thought to craft this was because anyone who's going to create a world, I think, has at least the passing responsibility of trying to account for how come bad things happen. If you could wave a wand and say all is good and everything works out well, that'd be fine. Of course, there might not be any growth in such a world. But if there are bad things that happen, particularly if you say, well, there are benevolent person or persons above us who wish to have things go well for us, well, then why is there evil? I'm not going to be able to answer that question, but in this particular book, I have some fun with it. And that is to say that the world actually was created by a demon, a great demon, the greatest demon of all. And it's his personality and his essence that sort of give the taste to the world. And so there are bad things. Conversely, there's also in one part of the world that he neglected or didn't pay much attention to, a goodness arises. And you can get into a discussion about whether inherent goodness is always there or whether it had to be introduced. I don't know. But and so there then develops a tension between the two, and that drives a lot of the story.
It does. And it also brings out a lot of the characteristics of Thaddeus from his honor perspective, from his willingness to be all in all the time, which you had alluded to earlier, as far as his development. And when he's loyal, he's really, really loyal. The other thing I kind of recall, and I so could be incorrect, but these four young men are aligned to almost compass points in their relationship. Now, you mentioned the four suits of cards, but are they also like compass points in that they have certain things that they do, and yet they meet in the middle?
Yes. It was a sort of a way, a trope, sort of a way to work around certain ideas about how the story could develop. But yes, I thought of them as compass points. And it's almost like they had magnetic personalities. I'm sorry. But I thought of them as compass points and was thinking, well, how can I introduce that? So I thought, well, what's one of the most common tools at hand in epic fantasy to use? And that is, of course, prophecy. And everybody has a prophecy. You are up to here with prophecies. But I thought, well, I'll give it one more try. So in this prophecy, it alludes to these four, and the prophecy is saying, in essence, that these four people have to get together in order for good things to happen, and that drives a lot of the story as well.
So as we move into the second trilogy, Thaddeus at this point is alone, trying to struggle with how he has to approach life now after the challenges that he has behind him. And he comes across the demons again in a whole different way. And it's almost like they're challenging him in a different way. Is that how you intended that? Because that's how I read it.
Yes, absolutely. As it turns out, he suffers a significant loss toward the end of the first trilogy. And to repair this loss, he finds that he must make another journey, but a farther and more dangerous journey, this time towards the east, let's say. And it's there that he is helped, and he's brought to a point, or could say takes himself to a point where this loss is replenished, and he becomes restored. But in order to cap it off, in order to finalize it, he must have some commerce with the demons. And so he considers that he may have to come to them as someone seeking their aid. And one of his great struggles then would be to decide, do I really want to do this? And if I do, what would be the consequences?
And I think that's a perfect pause for us to be able to take. So, Louis Sauvain, this has been so much fun. I look forward to another episode. soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.